Hey everybody, my name is Jesse Collins, and I want to tell you all about my show, the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. On the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, we do a thorough analysis on the biggest issues and trends within the pro wrestling industry. We talk a lot about pro wrestling media, we talk a lot about fan culture and wrestling's place within general pop culture, and we talk about the broader influences that are shaping the way we discuss and analyze the pro wrestling industry. We've had some of the brightest minds in the pro wrestling intelligentsia on the show, including WrestleNomics host Brandon Thurston, both Rich Craich and Joe Lanza from the Flagship Wrestling Podcast, Trevor Dame from the Through the Years podcast, and a whole lot more. This isn't a show for hot takes. It's not a show recapping the latest episode of television. This is a show focusing on the biggest topics in pro wrestling and doing a deep dive on the real stories behind the surface level analysis you might find elsewhere. The Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a try. Thanks.
Hey everyone, what you're about to hear is a free preview of a podcast on our Patreon. If you want to hear the full thing, please go to flagshippatreon.com and subscribe to either our $5 or $10 tier. A subscription to the $5 tier gives you access to most of our bonus audio, including Flagship Plus, the Overrun, as well as retro content like Jovember to Remember, our retro audio documentaries, as well as exclusive breaking news reports. You can upgrade to the $10 tier and unlock all of our bonus content, including written columns and reviews, as well as live shows like Instant Reaction Live and the Flagship Live, as well as all of the other benefits available on the $5 tier. Once again, that's flagshippatreon.com. And now to the free preview of one of our exclusive episodes.
But let's start here with these AEW cuts. So, in case you missed it, and in case you didn't listen to Rich earlier this morning, AEW cut a number of talents. The Boys, Jura Jewel, Anthony Henry, Gravity, Stu Grayson, Parker Bordeaux, Slim J, Dasha, and Jose the Assistant. So that's the headline. We've got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 total talents cut. 8 wrestlers, a ring announcer, and a manager. And the first thing here is, look, Tony Khan, AEW, they got to take their medicine here. They got to take their medicine. You can't go out there for 4 or 5 years and tell people and sort of use it as a bragging point that if you sign an AEW contract, you're going to see the end of that contract. You sign a 3-year deal, you're going to be paid for 3 years. We're not going to cut you. We're not going to let you go. That's what the other guys do. That other company is on a constant rolling 90-day deal. Not us. Our contracts are as good as gold. You're solid. Listen, they got to take their medicine here. Because unless these deals were per date deals, or unless they're releasing these people and paying them the remainder of what they owe, right? Which in that case, it wouldn't make much sense to make cuts if you're just going to pay the people anyway. You may as well keep them around, and even if you're not using them much, you're not getting any savings out of it, so that wouldn't make any sense. But unless that's the case, if these are all per date deals, or you're paying all of these people in full but just setting them free out of the goodness of your heart because you feel like you don't have anything else to offer them in terms of on-screen work, then AEW has to take their medicine here. And the critics have every right to bash them for participating in the same business practices that WWE does. And what it also does is you lose a little bit of that competitive advantage with free agents to where up to this point in AEW's history, they had never cut or fired a contracted talent unless it was for cause. That all changes with these 10 cuts on Monday. Again, if these were not simply per date deals where they're not going to use the people any further, because that's something a little different, or if they're paying these people in full. But according to all of the reports that are out there, these were not contracts that had come due that are not being renewed. And these were talent cuts. People being released from contracts. So I have to go off the information that I have at the time that I'm analyzing this news. So from that standpoint, AEW has to take their medicine. Tony Khan has to take his medicine. Okay? Number two, the second thing here, I've seen some people say, oh, well, AEW just promoted a COO. So this sure seems like it's the work of the new COO. Taking a look at the books, taking a look at the operations, and deciding we have a bloated roster. We got to make some cuts. That's a bunch of nonsense. I don't care if they promoted a COO. I don't care if this was somebody's idea other than Tony Khan's that maybe they should let some people go. At the end of the day, if you're passing the buck to the new COO or anybody else in that company and blaming them for this change in the way AEW does business with their contracts, that's no different than in the past where WWE would make cuts, and depending on the era, people would go, oh, it's not Vince, it was Jim Ross who decided these people needed to go. Oh, Vince loved me, it was Johnny Ace that didn't like me, and he said he didn't have nothing for me, so he's the one who let me go. Or in more recent times, people blaming Nick Khan for cuts at the tail end of the Vince era, instead of the man who is wholly and solely responsible for those decisions, Vince McMahon. In this case, make no mistake, Tony Khan is wholly responsible for these cuts. Not some new hokey COO, not anybody else. Because if Tony Khan wanted these 10 people employed in his company, if he wanted their contracts to continue, they would. If Tony Khan didn't want to make cuts, didn't want to make these talent cuts, they wouldn't be made. The buck stops with Tony Khan. It's his company. He runs the company. He makes these decisions. None of these decisions are being made without being rubber stamped by Tony Khan.
Music. It's not just part of our daily lives, it's part of our wrestling fandom as well, and it has been for decades. That's where this show comes in. Music of the Mat, the podcast devoted exclusively to the music of pro wrestling, hosted by Andrew Rich. Hey, that's me. Each episode delivers a different topic with a variety of great guests, fun conversations, musical analysis, and of course, a heartfelt pun or two. New episodes drop every other Tuesday on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice. Check out Music of the Mat only on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.